Find a new way to live in Toronto's coveted Forest Hill neighborhood. Foray by Canderel blends thoughtful, livable suite design with refined finishes and more than 50,000 square feet of amenities, including wellness spaces, work-from-home areas, fitness facilities, and places to unwind. A modern, elevated community crafted for the life you've earned. Your next home starts from $599,000. Learn more at live@foray.ca. That's live@foret.ca.
Those publications weren't particularly interested in the specificity of the experiences of women from different backgrounds. And there was some feeling that Jewish women's experiences must surely be different because all Jews are privileged. There was some degree of maybe unconscious bias.
Hi, I'm Phoebe Maltz Bovy, and you're listening to The Jewish Angle from the Canadian Jewish News. My guest today is Susan Weidman Schneider. Susan was born in Winnipeg and was, in 1976, one of the co-founders of Lilith magazine, where she is editor-in-chief. She is also a feminist activist, as well as author of the books Jewish and Female, as well as the book Intermarriage, which, side note, I did my doctoral dissertation on the topic of intermarriage, so I have many very tangential things I would like to chat about with Susan. Perhaps for another time, we'll see. But I'm having her on for the occasion of, as you might have gathered, if you are a mathy sort, 1976 to 2026, 50 years of Lilith. Susan, welcome to The Jewish Angle and congrats.
Thank you. It feels a little bit like a life sentence, although I hope to live many years still. Yeah, it's been a wonderful journey and very exciting and lots of changes for women and to some extent in the Jewish community over these 50 years for sure.
And that's what we're going to be discussing absolutely today. So some of our listeners, I'm sure, will already know this. And, full disclosure, I already know this. But to the uninitiated, what is Lilith today?
Lilith is a magazine and a series of online publications and wonderful online events, including writing workshops and presentations. And Lilith also has become a petri dish for mentoring women writers and activists over the years. We've had more than a couple of hundred interns, many of them from Canada. We run a writing program for emerging women writers over 40.
Well, as a woman over 40 in Canada, I appreciate that.
And it has been total fun. It's been a wonderful opportunity.
But I want to ask, so Lilith began in 1976, and I want to know what prompted its founding.
It was a moment when, of course, there were a lot of discussions, both macro discussions in the media and in-person discussions through consciousness-raising groups and women's friendship circles about changes afoot around how we think about our roles, how we think about gender roles, what is carved in granite, what is not, what are the expectations that we grew up with. And it was also a time where there was a lot of ferment in the public sphere. And also 1976 was a moment when Ms. Magazine had just begun to publish. There were a bunch of newsletters and newspapers that were dealing with women's issues. One of them called Majority Report. One of them, and it had ads in the back for, I'm now divorced from this man, but he's a perfectly good person if you should meet him. And, all the effort I put into training him to be a good human being, I would hate for it to go to waste. So if you meet him,
I want to interrupt and ask you all about that specifically, because it's just so funny. Like, I'm thinking about how there are now these Facebook groups that are like warning people, like, don't like about their exes. But I feel like this is almost the opposite of that. That's funny and kind of charming that that there would have been a like, he wasn't for me, but.
Right. Well, also, hate to have all that labor wasted.
That's true. True.
But it was also a time when those publications weren't particularly interested in the specificity of the experiences of women from different backgrounds. And there was some feeling that Jewish women's experiences must surely be different because all Jews are privileged. There was some degree of um, maybe unconscious bias that was seeing Jewish women as women of privilege and not suffering from some of the same constraints.
I want to just expand a bit on this relationship between Judaism and feminism, because on the one hand, there are all sorts of patriarchal elements in the more observant or traditionalist denominations. And obviously, sexism just exists in society. So it's not as if, like, because a Jewish man happens to be secular, he couldn't do a sexism. However, um, Jewish women have certainly held our own in the mainstream feminist movement, something that anti Semitic misogynists have not let us forget. So like what is it? What is the deal, as I would say if I were Jerry Seinfeld, with Jewish women and feminism?
I think a couple of things, and putting aside for the moment the idea of finding growing room within Jewish practice where women are now reading from Torah and women are now, when Lilith first started, the size of a bookshelf you needed to hold all the books that had been written and were about to be written, maybe 3 feet long. And now, of course, there are libraries full. There's, as we know, a real thrust in Jewish texts for not standing idly by, for correcting wrongs, for making sure that we can do tikkun olam, that we can make the world a better place, that we can do repair, that if there are people who are hungry, we want to cook for them, that if there are people in all of the traditions around, um, even traditions around mourning, where you take care of someone during a Shiva week, where someone is feeling deep loss, deep trauma, and all of that's built into the tradition. So there is a real sense that you can make things better. The story of Moshe, of Moses, enraged that a slave was being beaten by a cruel taskmaster. And the notion, quite powerful in Jewish teachings, is that you have an obligation to make things better. It's not upon you to complete the task, but you are obligated to start it. So partly it's, even if it isn't a message that's absorbed through text study, it was certainly a message that came through in popular culture in a way through the idea of the loudmouth Jewish woman.
I wanted to ask you how Jewish feminist priorities have evolved over the past 50 years, whether there are specifically like any specific topics that have either entered more recently or sort of receded from the picture during that time. Obviously, I'm like trying to, with my loud Jewish woman self, is like Roe v. Wade, but yeah, I mean, there's other stuff presumably as well.
When Lilith first wrote about the Jewish stake in abortion rights, the cover was 2 wire coat hangers in the shape of a Jewish star, in the shape of a Magen David. Coat hanger, photographed on the floor of my living room. And that became an iconic article that laid out the fact that in Jewish teachings and Jewish law, the life of the mother takes precedence over the life of the baby, that the fetus, that life does not begin at conception, and how important it was to foreground that the Jewish view of reproduction is different from that of, say, the Roman Catholic Church. And one of the articles that we ran was Abortion Foes, Bad News for Jews. and why that is. So already there was a construct in place for caring a lot about this, and Lilith has partnered for several years for something called Repro Shabbat, which was last Shabbat, where we have had, of all things, a challah baking contest where people bake challahs in the shape of a uterus and fallopian tubes. And of course, some people roll their eyes, but it has been actually a consciousness raiser to make sure that rabbis of all and any gender are giving sermons over that Shabbat, that the Jewish stake in reproductive choices is very powerful.
So are there any topics that had seemed at one point very pressing and sort of fallen off?
Some topics, which I thought we'd laid to rest, actually, seem to surface every once in a while. And one of them, which I think is really very troubling, is the Jap stereotype, which might have had one of its early iterations in Herman Wouk's novel Marjorie Morningstar from a very long time ago, and which surfaced in particular in the 1980s, where the JAP was the acronym for the Jewish American Princess. It was at the time absolutely horrifying, of course, that you could see in the pages of various Jewish magazines little T-shirts for babies that say princess, and the eye of the word princess has a Jewish star with little rhinestone in it. That there were really very unpleasant greeting cards and aprons and all kinds of paraphernalia for sale in synagogue gift shops, including aprons that said, "What do I make for dinner? Reservations."
It's such a weird term in that it's both a, intersectionally sexist slur, but it's also something that you get Jewish women themselves using to describe, to sort of give a voice to a type of bullying that does exist, where Jewish women who are either unconventional in some way or don't have the money for nice clothes or whatever feel bullied or are bullied by other Jewish women who do have the nicer clothes, are more conventional. Then there's the Karen who, yes, in some usages, it's supposed to be pushing back against racist white women who certainly exist. In other usages, it's like the only time in real offline life anybody has ever referred to me as a Karen was I was, I believe, pregnant and on the streetcar in Toronto, and I asked some teenagers to wear a mask.
I think you're right on that the Karen is a kind of modern day outgrowth, someone who is too outspoken, and maybe, the white woman stuff gets attached to Karen. We heard from one puzzled university student who said, someone painted Jap on a dormitory room door, and I wasn't sure who they meant. The one inside with the fancy wardrobe, or the one inside who wanted to go to medical school. You're sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yeah,
If you are the dependent, kind
Mhm.
of sycophantic person who's going to be indulged by other people, or if you're the outspoken, loudmouth, smart girl in your class who is ambitious.
I mean, I almost wonder, like, one thing that I've been thinking about when I read the column about this was whether there's some way, and I'm kind of honestly pessimistic about this, of reclaiming Jap as a subculture, not as it is the thing that all Jewish women are, not as even that it's necessarily a thing that it's only Jewish women who are, but as a type, like an aesthetic that exists in the world among others. Where I'm pessimistic is that even though women of that subculture wouldn't have me, I've gotten called that simply basically because I'm a Jewish woman. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm not, from a destitute
Yes,
background. It doesn't matter that, I work. It doesn't matter, that
doesn't
my
matter.
taste in clothes is a little weird. Yeah. So I feel like it's something that I wish could be reclaimed as a subculture among many. I'm not super optimistic about it.
I'm
For
not
all
sure
these reasons.
reclamation, Phoebe, I'm not sure
Yeah.
reclamation is exactly what it should be, but I think modeling other ways of being in this world as a Jewish woman, outspoken and fearless. And everybody likes to look. I mean, nobody likes to look truly as if we've just rolled out of, I mean, I take that back. I'm sure that, in a sort of defiant way, it's fun to walk around looking like a schlump too. But that we make deliberate choices about how we communicate about ourselves and how we present to the outside world visually. And those visual cues are very important. But I also think it's important, as I think I mentioned in the beginning, that Lilith has had interns, many, many, many over the years. And we've just, in honor of the 50th anniversary, been doing some video interviews with some of them and hearing how powerful it was for them as they were shaping their own lives to see women doing things a little differently, perhaps from the ways that they were accustomed to, or that they had expected of themselves, or that they had seen female relatives living their lives, that there were lots of possibilities other than the standard issue. And we sort of laugh here in the Lilith office that it's a feminist workplace, which it is, both by design and by chance, because who wants to go to work someplace where you can't bring your full self to work? We are daughters and mothers and workers, and I mean, not all of us, but where you can say, I'm an artist and I'm also doing X in my job. I am someone who is a social justice activist and I'm on the ramparts on my weekends.
Speaking of feminist activism, so I say this as somebody who considers herself a feminist. So there is quite a tradition of feminist infighting. I'm thinking in terms of more recently, like things that Michelle Goldberg, the New York Times columnist, wrote about in The Nation in 2014 in that article, Feminism's Toxic Twitter Wars. I'm thinking about the tendency of Facebook binders groups for women writers to fall apart over various internal conflicts. There have been ones to do with race, class, gender identity, different views on this, different ones in the UK from in the US, from Canada, always different things going on. In my own book research for a book that I've written that's coming out in May about straight women, I found stuff from the 1980s about whether you can even be a straight woman and a feminist. There are all sorts of rifts, right? So what I wanted to ask you about, and none of this is even getting into stuff about like religious, can you be a religious feminist, whatever. Lilith is still going at 50. So you've obviously figured something out. And I'm wondering, how has Lilith approached rifts within feminism?
There are rifts within feminism and there are rifts within Jewish life. And we are always looking for, if not that middle ground, but how to sort of balance on that tightrope. And sometimes it feels like a razor's edge, where particularly now, post-October 7th, there have been serious fractures in the Jewish world with different opinions. It's always
That
been...
was actually going to be my next question. So yeah, we could talk about that as well, as you like in terms of order, but yes.
One of Lilith's strengths has been that we have turned the pages over to those, again, first-person voices. In many ways. I mean, in the first couple of issues of Lilith, this is 1976, 77, where Jewish women were talking about coming out as lesbians in their family context, in their work context, in their synagogues. We have turned the pages over to women with disabilities who talk about their experiences, the particular kind of abuse and discrimination that deaf women experience that might not be, that others might not even pick up on. And there's a lot of honor that we can give to people who are telling their own stories. And I think that has been one of the reasons that Lilith has been able to steer this course, allowing in a lot of different voices. We have had for a very long time Jews of every racial and ethnic background writing in Lilith, both their stories and writing on a whole
So
range.
that's very heartwarming. However, I have to ask, does it ever get tricky? Like, is there ever somebody writes something and other people are furious? Like, how do you navigate when I say this? I am the opinion editor at the CJN, so I'm aware of like one person's opinion infuriates another person, that type of,
Oh,
that
for sure,
and
for
not, so it's
sure.
not just within feminist spheres, I should say. But yeah, certainly once you're talking about, you got throw religion into the mix as well. And yeah.
Mostly when we are speaking particularly about religious issues, and I don't know, we put a capital R on that, there are those who, and the trolls are out with everything that we publish online too. So you hear all these opinions directly, whereas in the past you would have had to wait for a letter to the editor. One of the things that I'm aware of is that the room can hold it often. That whereas I might tend to feel like I want to be reactive and gee, I don't love this opinion, particularly with statements that get that we will foreground or share online, and other people will react. I don't have to be the one, as Lilith's editor-in-chief, to do the reacting, or any of the people who are, it's a small but mighty staff, as they call themselves, that others will jump in and do that work too, and hold the writer's feet to the fire. I disagree with you because, but it is very, very challenging now, in particular, where I've written editorials about how, and I've been called on the carpet for it, how difficult it is for me as a person of a certain age and a certain background who has lived in Israel to encounter the term anti-Zionist or I am post-Zionist, and to understand all the nuances. I mean, it's more than we can get into on the podcast, where we're focusing on feminist issues, and that's
Well,
not
no,
just...
my next question literally was going to be, and I want to just get my notes up about this, was just about the place of Jews on the left, not just in feminism, but on the left generally. And I think that in the 2010s and earlier 2020s, it was possible in a way it isn't now for there not really to be any conflict between being Jewish and taking the progressive stance, the expected sort of progressive line on the topics of the day. So like nothing about being Jewish means you couldn't take a pro-trans rights stand, however maximal you wanted to take that, or a pro-Black Lives Matter one. Obviously, not all Jews are super duper progressive and social justice type issues. I'm a sort of, I guess, roughly speaking, center-left type myself, liberal, I'm not a far-left activist, or indeed any sort of activist myself. To be on the left today is very much associated with taking stances on Israel that go beyond criticizing it, saying that it is a country with flaws, saying that you don't like specific actions, saying that you think the war has gone on too long, whatever, things like that. Criticisms that go beyond being kind of criticisms. And I'm just wondering, yeah, like how do you navigate that, whether it's you personally, you as Lilith as a publication, because it's
Lilith as a
tricky.
publication, interestingly, and of course we have faced this a lot of the last couple of years. One example of how we navigated it was that about maybe maybe near the end of 2024, don't hold me to that date, where we published a series of short articles around anti-Semitism, asking a whole range of people, rabbis and educators and just plain folks, how they were feeling, what they were encountering. And the range was pretty vast, and maybe there were, let's say, 8 or 10 short pieces on this subject, quite fascinating. And one of them was from a trans rabbi who says, I am a trans rabbi with an anti-Zionist congregation, or non-Zionist. I think he actually said anti-Zionist congregation, but let's say for now, because I don't have the article in front of me, where he made his position clear, non-Zionist. And someone called me and said, it's exactly the kind of congregation my kids would love to join. And so it was clear that in this same collection of articles, there was someone in a small town in Maine, a rabbi who writes about her experiences, where she was asked by a Girl Scout troop, not under Jewish auspices, to come in and teach the girls some words of Hebrew because they were worried about Israel, and as a sort of act of solidarity in this small town, she, as the rabbi, should come and help them. And these were maybe not Girl Scouts, maybe they were brownies. They were quite little, the kids. And you can hold both of those, I think, because Lilith isn't a journal of opinion. We can foreground the opinions of others, almost every one of them a Jewish woman. I mean, the case of the trans rabbi, the trans woman, where we take this, where we examine what are the implications of this for the future of Jewish comfort, Jewish safety anywhere. I don't know. I mean, it was quite fascinating to me editing the winter issue of Lilith, which is now coming off the press, where we look at what's going on for Jews in Australia, who are feeling very beleaguered right now, and Jewish women writing about that. And what about Venezuela, a rabbi in the United States who has strong family ties in Venezuela, about how complex that situation is for Jews there. And so it, without being a broken record, I think that there's a lot of usefulness in providing a forum for these opinions to come together in one publication.
I think that's great. And I think that that's a message for Jewish publications. I mean, not only Jewish publications, but I say this from the Canadian Jewish News, for Jewish publications generally, just, when thinking, as we all think, all of us who work at them, what our purpose is. I think that this idea of sort of testimony and different voices, obviously which exact parameters are going to be relevant are going to depend which publication it is. But this has given me a lot to think about in terms of Jewish feminist history, also just how to run that opinion section at the CJN. Thank you so much, Susan Weidman Schneider. This has been fantastic to speak with you and to hear all about Lilith. To another 50 and more years of Lilith. This is great. Thank you.
Alavai, thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to seeing your book in just a few months.
Thank you so much. I am honored. Thank you for listening to The Jewish Angle, a podcast from the Canadian Jewish News. This has been Phoebe Maltz Bovy, opinion editor of the CJN and a contributing editor of Scribe Quarterly, the CJN's print magazine. The show is produced and edited by Michael Fraiman. Our music is by Frank Freeman. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to The Jewish Angle wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.